Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulih al-Kareem. Amma ba'd. قد قال الله تعالى في كتابه العزيز بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم قل هو الله أحد. Alhamdulillah, continuing on with our tafsir series, our tafsir lectures, our tafsir webinars. We have reached almost the end of the last chapters of the Holy Quran. And specifically this chapter, an interesting narration that comes to mind is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He once came and he told his companions that, shall I not recite 1/3 of the Quran to you? And the Sahaba, or one narration mentions where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions that he comes and he tells his companions, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in, that which one of you are able to recite 1/3 of the Quran in the nighttime? And the Sahaba were perplexed, astonished, that how is it possible on a normal basis, on a daily basis, to recite 1/3, 10 juz, 10 paras of the Quran every night? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself gave the answer, and he said that, are you not able to recite Surah Ikhlāṣ? قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Because this chapter of the Quran, this surah, as we'll see inshallah coming up, is equivalent to 1/3 of the Quran. It's equivalent to 1/3 of the Quran. So before going into the tafsir of this surah, an overview of what this chapter, this surah discusses, Surah Ikhlāṣ. Surah Ikhlāṣ means the surah of sincerity. Another name for the surah, this chapter, is Surah at-Tawheed. And Tawheed means the oneness of Allah. So from this chapter's name, you can understand that this surah discusses the oneness of Allah. And this chapter discusses the oneness of Allah in such a comprehensive manner, in such a comprehensive method, in 4 short verses. Yet, these 4 verses are enough. These 4 verses are enough, are sufficient to establish the oneness of Allah, to describe the being of Allah, that we are not in need of any other verses. That these 4 verses are so comprehensive that these are enough for us to establish the oneness of Allah, the Tawheed of Allah. These are enough to establish the Sifat of Allah, the attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal, that we do not need any other verses. So that's what this chapter discusses. And now in regards to when this chapter, this surah was revealed, there's differences of opinion. There's difference of opinion. Some scholars, which we'll see inshallah, are under the opinion that this chapter was revealed in Makkah, in the early days of the prophethood of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then some scholars are under the opinion that this surah, this chapter was revealed later on. This chapter was revealed later on when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrated to Medina. So we'll see the difference of opinion in the slides coming up inshallah. And then finally, what the surah aims to discuss and the point that it comes across with is that this surah negates all types of wrong beliefs. That all these mushrikeen, all these people who have these false notions and these false beliefs regarding the Dhat of Allah, the being of Allah, this surah negates all those types of wrong beliefs. Now in Islam, what's interesting is that you have different types of disbelievers, right? You have, for example, people who believe in Isa alayhi salam as the prophet, as the son of Allah. You have some Jewish sects who believe that Uzair was the son of Allah. So you have different disbeliefs, right? You have some disbelievers who are Hindus, some disbelievers who are Buddhists. But Islam, Shari'at, considers all types of disbeliefs as one, which is al-kufru millatun wahida. That all types of disbelief is considered one. In other words, if you disbelieve in Allah Azza wa Jal, in any manner, in any method, once you disbelieve in Allah, no matter how it may be, that is considered as being a kafir. So as you see over here, there's different types of disbelievers. You have one, for example, is they reject Allah Azza wa Jal. They reject the whole concept of God. That nowadays this movement, which is very famous, which is atheism, that just because they don't understand the Dhat of Allah Azza wa Jal, they reject Allah Azza wa Jal, which doesn't necessarily make sense logically. And that is a whole discussion for another topic, for another day, that in regards to atheism. So you have this type of disbelief, where they reject the being of Allah, the Dhat of Allah Azza wa Jal completely. That's number one, in its totality. Then you have another group of disbelievers, which they believe in Allah, but they don't necessarily deem it necessary to have a God. That's not necessary. So they deny this necessary concept aspect. Then you have another group of disbelievers that they believe in Allah, they believe that it's necessary to have a God, but they reject what? His attributes of perfection. So they say, for example, that Allah has certain qualities which are not necessarily perfect, that they have lack or they have deficiency inside of them. And you have another quality or another group of disbelievers who believe in all the above. They believe in a God, they believe in the necessary aspect. They say that God has all attributes of perfection, but what are they? What's their aspect of disbelief? How do they disbelieve? They associate partners to Allah Azza wa Jalla. They associate partner to God. That they say that there's not one being, there's not one Lord, rather there's multiple lords. There's multiple deities worthy of worship. So all these are different types of kufr, disbelief. But even though there's slight differences amongst them, all of them are a result of kufr, disbelief in Allah Azza wa Jalla. And this surah aims to tackle every single one of these and all those types of disbelief in 4 short verses. Now, what was the cause of revelation for this chapter? What was the cause of revelation for the surah to be revealed? So once دخلوا على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, that the narration mentioned that the Yahud, the Jewish people, came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to describe Allah Azza wa Jal, and they asked him of the nasab, the genealogy, the lineage of Allah Azza wa Jal. Na'udhu billah. That what is the lineage? What is the ancestry? What is the family line of Allah Azza wa Jal? And what did they say? They said Allah Azza wa Jal himself describes himself in the Torah, in the Injil, the books of the Bible and the Old Testament and the New Testament. So the Yahud, the Jewish people, came dakhalu ala Rasulullah, and they asked that Allah Azza wa Jal himself describes himself in the Torah and the Injil. So now, what does Allah Ta'ala say? What do you have to say about Allah Azza wa Jal? Describe Allah Azza wa Jal and his family, his genealogy. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the narration mentions, he fell unconscious. And when he fell unconscious, Jibreel came to him and revealed this chapter. Now, another narration mentions that it wasn't the Yahud, the Jewish people, asking the question. Rather, it was the Mushrikeen of Makkah, the pagans of Makkah. They came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they said, Ya Rasulullah, O Muhammad. They didn't believe in Muhammad. They didn't say Rasulullah. They said, Oh, Ya Muhammad. Because they didn't believe Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam as the messenger of Allah. So they said, Oh Muhammad. They said, tell us about the ancestry of our Lord, of your Lord. So Allah Ta'ala revealed this chapter, this surah. So now, according to this narration, you have the Mushrikeen of Makkah, and you have another narration which is saying that the Yahud were the ones who posed this question, this demand to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another narration mentions that the pagans asked whether Allah was made of gold, silver, or what material was Allah Azza wa Jal made of. So in response to all these questions and all these false ideologies, all these false beliefs, this chapter, this surah was revealed. So in light of these conflicting reports, that's why there's a difference of opinion. Because in Makkah, who was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam confronting? It was the mushrikeen, the people who had this polytheistic pagans of Makkah. And then when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to Medina, who was he confronting? It was the Yahud. So that is why some scholars say it was revealed in Makkah, and other scholars said that it was revealed in Medina. Now, what is some virtues of this surah? I mentioned one previously, where Imam Ahmad himself also narrates a narration in his Musnad, that a person came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said, I love this surah, Surah Ikhlāṣ, referring to Surah Ikhlāṣ immensely. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave him glad tidings that your love for this surah will cause your interest into paradise. So this shows that when we have love for the deen of Allah Azza wa Jal, that we have love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this love for the deen of Allah, this love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam can be a means of us entering into Jannah, paradise. And then you have another narration of Tirmidhi where Abu Hurairah narrates that once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he came and he gathered the Sahaba and he said, I shall recite to you 1/3 of the Quran. So when the people started gathering to see what does Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mean that he's going to recite 1/3 of the Quran, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he recited Surah al-Ikhlāṣ. And after reciting Surah al-Ikhlāṣ, Qul huwallahu ahad, he said this surah is equivalent to 1/3 of the Quran. Another narration comes where Qul huwallahu ahad ta'adilu thuluth al-Quran, where Rasulullah ﷺ mentioned that Surah Ikhlāṣ, Qul huwallahu ahad, is equal to 1/3 of the Quran. So now what does this mean? When Rasulullah ﷺ is saying that Surah Ikhlāṣ is equal to 1/3 of the Quran. So number one, you can take it as in terms of a reward. That a person, just by reciting these 4 verses, Qul huwallahu ahad, to the end, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, he gets the reward equal to reciting 1/3 of the Quran. Subhanallah. Just by reciting these 4 verses, he gets the reward equal to reciting 1/3 of the Quran. So that's one way you can interpret this narration of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another way you can interpret this narration is in terms of meaning and sciences. What does this mean? That the Quran discusses 3 aspects, or it discusses 3 components. What are these 3? Number 1 is the Tawheed, the oneness of Allah Azza wa Jal. Number 2, the Quran goes into rulings, ahkamat. And then finally, the Quran discusses and it goes into qisas, stories. And what is this chapter amongst these 3? What is this chapter, this surah Ikhlāṣ go into? It goes into the first one, which is the oneness of Allah, the Tawheed of Allah. So that is what Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam meant. You can interpret it this way, where when Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that Surah Ikhlāṣ is equal to 1/3 of the Quran, that the Quran discusses 3 aspects, 3 discussions: the Tawheed of Allah, the rulings of Allah, the rulings, ahkam of deen, and the qisas, stories of the people of the past. So this chapter itself discusses and tackles 1/3, which is the Tawheed of Allah Azza wa Jal. The oneness of Allah Azza wa Jal. So now moving on to the actual tafsir. What does Allah say in the first ayah? Allah says, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم قل هو الله أحد. Allah is telling Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to tell them that Allah Azza wa Jal is one. He is one. This itself, when Allah addresses Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in the Quran as Qul, that say, O Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, this is Ithbatu Nubuwah. This is Allah Ta'ala establishing the prophethood of Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Now in this verse, Allah Ta'ala used the word Qul Huwa, Allah. Huwa is referring to Allah, and Allah is also referring to Allah. So now this Huwa, this personal noun, is going back to Allah Azza wa Jal. So now according to the scholars of Basra, this personal noun Huwa, Qul Huwa, is brought for ta'zeem, is brought for respect and greatness, grandeur. Right? It's brought to show the grandeur of Allah Azza wa Jal. So that's why Qul Huwa is al-dhamir li-ta'zeem. It's a personal noun which is brought for respect and greatness of Allah Azza wa Jal. Now, in this verse, Allah Ta'ala is saying, Allahu Ahad, that Allah is Ahad. Now, Ahad has 2 meanings. Number 1, you can take it as negating. That Allah Ta'ala is saying, Qul huwa Allahu Ahad, that there is none other than Allah Azza wa Jal. La thaniya lahu, that there is no second to Allah Azza wa Jal. You're negating. Just like, for example, in Arabic, you say, Ma ja'ani ahadun. No one came to me. So similarly over here, Allah is saying, La thaniya. When Allah says, Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allah Ta'ala is saying, there is none other than Allah Azza wa Jal. There is no thani. There is no second for Allah Azza wa Jal. That's one way you can interpret the word ahad in this verse. Another way you can interpret it is, Allah Ta'ala is saying He is one. And this, when Allah Ta'ala says He is one, this can be understood 3 ways. The first one is He is one and there's none other than Him. So there's no second for Him. He is alone, there's no partners for Him. This is the preferred opinion. Then you can also interpret it as ahad, meaning, number 2, there's no equal to Him. La laysa kamithlihi shay. There is none equal to Allah Azza wa Jal. And number 3, when Allah says, Qul huwa Allahu ahad, He is one, meaning He is one as a being. He isn't divided into parts. He is one being. The that of Allah, the being of Allah is one. It's not divided. It's not comprising of parts. So these are the 3 ways you can understand the word ahad. That the number 1, la thaniya lahu, that there's no second for Allah Azza wa Jal. He is alone. There's no partners for Him. Number 2, there is no equal to Allah Azza wa Jal. Laysa kamithlihi shay, la nadhira lahu, that there is no one equal to Allah Azza wa Jal. And finally, you can understand it as He is one in terms of His being, His that. That His being is one. It's one being. It's not consisting of any parts. Now, in regards to the oneness of Allah, there's many ayat, there's many verses which establish the oneness of Allah. 4 clear verses that you can look at, and you can look at these references And you can understand in the tafsir. If you look at each tafsir of these ayat, these verses, the first one is Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, establishing the oneness of Allah. أَفَمَنْ يَخْلُقُ كَمَنْ لَا يَخْلُقُ. That can the one who creates be like those who do not create? That Allah has this quality of al-Khaliq. He is the creator. So now Allah is the one who brings things into existence. Mankind or anything else does not have this quality of khalq, creating. So now who has this quality of creating? Only Allah Azza wa Jal. So now since Allah is the one who is al-Khaliq, the creator, none others share this quality with Allah Azza wa Jal, then this establishes the tawheed, the oneness of Allah. This is one verse. Another verse which establishes the oneness of Allah is لَوْ كَانَ فِيهِمَا آلِهَةٌ إِلَّا اللَّهُ لَفَسَدَتَا. That Allah is saying in the Quran, if there was actually more Allahs, if there was actually more deities, then besides Allah Azza wa Jal, what would have happened? لَفَسَدَتَا. There would have been chaos on the earth. Just like how you cannot have two presidents. You need one president. If you have two presidents, what happens? Inner fighting. One will fight the other until one overpowers the other. So similarly, Allah is saying, if that was the case, where there was multiple deities, then there would have been chaos on the face of this earth. But rather, you see that everything is created in perfect harmony. The sun comes out, and it's every time in a specific time, or with this cycle. The moon has a cycle. Everything is working with the will of the one Allah Azza wa Jal, the one being who is Allah Azza wa Jal. Then Allah says in another verse, قُلْ لَوْ كَانَ مَعَهُ آلِهَةٌ. That if there was another deity with Allah Azza wa Jal, كَمَا يَقُولُونَ, just like how some mushrikeen claim that there is, just like how you have in Greek ideology, they have so many gods, the god of war, the god of love, the god of thunder, Zeus, all these different gods. They claim all these different deities, right? So what is Allah saying? That then the case would have been such where one God would have been defeating another God for the throne. And then eventually that one deity would have dethroned all other deities. And this is wrong, because the concept, just the ideology and this belief of Allah, we believe him as all-powerful. So now when a deity becomes defeated, then that defeats the whole meaning and definition of deity. So Allah is saying that if that was the case, then what would have happened? One deity would have overpowered the other deities. And that's impossible in the case of Allah, because Allah is all-powerful and Allah Ta'ala is one. So it's another verse. Another verse, Allah Ta'ala says, وَمَا كَانَ مَعَهُ مِنْ إِلَهٍ إِذَا لَذَهَبَ كُلُّ إِلَهٍ مِمَا خَلَقَ وَلَعَلَى بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. The same thing Allah Ta'ala is saying in this verse, that لَعَلَى بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. If there was multiple deities, one deity would have overpowered another deity. So these are four verses. You can go back to in the tafsir and see that these verses are clearly establishing the tawheed of Allah Azza wa Jal, the oneness of Allah Azza wa Jal. Then Allah Ta'ala continues on in the surah. Allah Ta'ala says, Allahu Samad. Allah is the eternal refuge. So what does this mean? In Arabic, the word Samad has three meanings. The first one is that take refuge in Allah in all matters. That being whom one always falls back to for their needs and wants. That in times of needs, in times of wants, or any needs that we have, any desires that we have, yulja'u ilayhi. That mankind, we refer back to him. We take refuge in Allah Azza wa Jal. We find our needs and wants answered in Allah Azza wa Jal. That's the first meaning of Samad. That we are dependent on Allah Azza wa Jal. We need Allah to fulfill our desires, wants, and needs. Allah does not need us. Rather, we need Allah Azza wa Jal. So that's the first way. That's the first meaning of Samad. Right? We find our malja, refuge in Allah Azza wa Jal. The second meaning is Allahu Samad, that Allah doesn't eat or drink. And then the third meaning is that la ju'a lahu, that there's no hunger for Allah Azza wa Jal. That Allah is never starving. Allah is never in the state of, Allah does not need any food, water to sustain his being. So, according to Ibn Atiyah, that the first meaning is the preferred meaning. That when we say Allahu Samad, Allah is the eternal refuge. That we always find refuge in Allah Azza wa Jal. That we are muhtaj. We are muftaqir. We are in need of Allah Azza wa Jal. We need to, that we find all our refuge in Allah Azza wa Jal. So Allah is that being who created everything. Nothing can exist by itself. Rather, everything and everyone is in need and depends on Allah Azza wa Jal. So that is what Allahu Samad means. That Allah is the eternal refuge, that we always find any needs and desires that we have, wants, we always find a refuge back in Allah Azza wa Jal. Now Allah continues on, Lam yalid wa lam yulad. He neither begets nor is he born. Mean he doesn't give birth to, nor was he born, nor was Allah Azza wa Jal born. Wa na'udhu billah. So now what does Lam yalid mean? This is a repulsion against those who claim that Allah Azza wa Jal has children. Right? You have the mushrikeen, for example, the pagans of Makkah. They believe that al-malaika banatullah, that they said that the angels were the daughters of Allah. You had the Christians. They believed that Isa alayhi salam was the son of Allah. You had some Jewish sects that they believed that Uzair was the son of Allah. So this verse is a rad against them, that lam yalid, that Allah does not give birth. He does not beget. And Allah himself brings clear proofs in the Quran rejecting this idea of him having children. So 4 rational and clear proofs that we can use is number 1, that it's necessary for a child to be from the same species as the father, right? If there's a human child, then that means it came from a human father. If you have a human cub, that means it came from a human, or if you have a lion cub, that means it came from a lion, right? So every species, every child is the same species as a father. But this is impossible for Allah Azza wa Jal. Why? Because Allah is that being, laysa kamithlihi shay, that there's none like him. La nadhira lahu, that there is none like him. So since there's no species like Allah Azza wa Jal, then there's no being like Allah Azza wa Jal, then it's impossible for Allah to have a child. That's one clear and rational proof. Number 2 is, a father takes a child due to need. Right? Sometimes a father needs assistance, financial support, or he needs physical support, or any need that a father has, right? We need children sometimes due to need. But what is the that of Allah? The being of Allah is such a being which is free of any needs. That is how we define of Allah. That's how we define Allah, that it is free of any needs. That he's not muhtaj. Allah does not depend on anything. Rather, we depend on Allah Azza wa Jal. So that's the second aqli, rational proof you can use. The third one is, every single creation is the same of Allah. Right? This is specifically rad against those who claim that the prophets are the sons of Allah. Just because you're a prophet of Allah, just because they're prophets of Allah, it doesn't negate their ubudiyah, their slavehood, that them being the slaves of Allah. So yes, they have a specific stage or a specific rank, specific prestige in the eyes of Allah, but being a prophet, having nubuwwat, doesn't negate the ubudiyyah, the slave of Allah Azza wa Jal, being a slave of Allah Azza wa Jal. And finally, you cannot have a child without a spouse. And Allah is free of all these deflects, all these flaws. Allah is perfect. Allah is all-powerful, does not need anything. And Allah is not in need of any spouse. He's not muhtaj. Allah is not in need. He does not depend on anything. So Allah says, and then, walam yulad, in the surah, walam yulad, that he does not give birth. Right? Or he was not given birth to. Right? This is a rad against the Yahud and the Mushrikeen. When they came, the Jewish and the pagans of Makkah, when they came and they asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, inform us about the genealogy, about the lineage of Allah Azza wa Jal, of God. So Allah is eternal. There is no beginning and end for him. Right? Allah is that being which is infinite. There was no beginning for Allah and there's no end for Allah. Allah is the one who created time. If we understand that Allah created time, then before the creation of time, there was no time, right? So Allah created time. Allah created space. So that is why Allah is the creator of everything. So Allah is eternal. No beginning and no end. Right? If you have this problem where, yes, every creation needs a creator, right? It needs something to go back to. And that's Allah Azza wa Jal. So therefore, since Allah is eternal, there can't be any child for him. Right? Everything created has a beginning, but Allah is the one who created it. So Allah is the creator, not the created. So that is the main thing, that Allah is eternal. So there is no lineage. There is no lineage for Allah Azza wa Jal. There is no family line for Allah Azza wa Jal. Rather, Allah is the one who created everything. Time, space, lineage, progenies. Allah is the one who created everything. Allah is eternal. Always existed and always will exist. Allah is infinite. Then Allah Ta'ala ends off the surah, the chapter, by saying, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, that there is none like him. There is no one equivalent to Allah Azza wa Jal. In his qualities, in his sifat, in his attributes, in his being, there is none equal to Allah Azza wa Jal. So a summary of this chapter of the surah is, in this chapter, in verse 1, Allah Ta'ala is refuting all false beliefs. Right? Allah, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, that Allah is one. And Allah is one in such a way where He is one. There's no partners for Him. There's no one that's like Allah Azza wa Jal. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ, that we cannot conceive of the being of Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? So that is in verse 1. Then Allah Ta'ala says in verse 2 that it refers to those practices or those people who worship Allah, but they associate partners to Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? Allah says, Allahu Samad, that Allah is that being which everyone finds refuge in. So this denounces any notion of any other deity that we can go back to, we fall back to. Rather, there's only one God, there's only one deity, and that's Allah Azza wa Jalla, As-Samad, that we find eternal refuge in, that we go back to. There's no other deity, there's no being besides Allah where we can find our needs and desires and ambitions in. We can fulfill them in. Rather, we worship Allah Azza wa Jalla alone. And then finally, Allah Ta'ala says, Lam yalid wa lam yulad. And this is a group amongst people, disbelievers, where they say that Allah Ta'ala gave birth to specific people, or Allah Ta'ala gave birth to, or Allah Ta'ala has children. And this verse, Lam yalid, it does rad, it repulses, and it goes against that notion that Allah Ta'ala is that being which created everything. So just this concept, this attribute, this sifat of Allah, of al-Khaliq, Allah Ta'ala being creator, that everything was created, and who is the creator? Allah Azza wa Jal. So everything else after that makes sense. Because if everything is created by Allah Azza wa Jal, Allah Ta'ala is creator, and He's free, He's all powerful, free of all flaws and defects. So that is a summary of the surah, that the Tawheed, the oneness of Allah, is established through the surah. And we as Muslims should be fortunate. We as Muslims should make shukr to Allah Azza wa Jal, that we breathe this kalima, we breathe this tawheed of Allah Azza wa Jal, that our kalima is La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, that there's none worthy of worship, there's no being, there's no deity worthy of worship besides Allah Azza wa Jal. And the messenger of Rasulullah is His messenger, not His slave, not His son, rather the messenger of Allah Azza wa Jal, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So this, having this blessing of this kalima, La ilaha illallah, Rasulullah mentioned in the hadith that when called La ilaha illallah, that the one who says La ilaha illallah, mukhlisan, with sincerity, dakhal al-Jannah, he is guaranteed Jannah. That he is guaranteed Jannah. So us being the ummah of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, being the nation of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, breathing this kalima La ilaha illallah, being born as a Muslim, already having the keys of success, it's a great blessing, a great ni'mat from Allah Azza wa Jalla upon us. Imagine if we were born as a person who didn't believe in Allah Azza wa Jal. Imagine if we were born as those individuals, those groups, those religions, or those group of people who have this ideology that they literally take a idol, they place it on their table and they worship that idol, calling and crying to the idol. Allah protect wa na'udhu billah. Imagine if we were born into those families of associating partners to Allah Azza wa Jal, of having these kufri beliefs. Or imagine, which is unfortunate nowadays, where if we were born or if we had this mindset of completely rejecting Allah, not believing on Allah. And what is the result? أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ, where all these atheists, all these agnostics, whatever it may be, at the end of the day, their agenda is أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ, that do you not see those people who have taken their desires as their lords? So even though they're rejecting Allah, a being, a God, rather they're taking their desires, they follow their desires, whatever their desires tell them, right? That's the famous thing. The progressive understanding is that the people of the past were backwards, and nowadays we are progressing. This is a completely wrong ideology and mindset and thought system to have, right? Because what's happening is you're following your desires, and it becomes very subjective. What you're saying can differ with what someone else is saying. Just because you're saying this is right, someone else can say this is wrong, right? The same thing. Rather, we have the creator, the one who created right and wrong, telling us what's right and what's wrong. So us being Muslims, having this ni'mat, this kalima la ilaha illallah, is one of the greatest blessings we have and we're enjoying. And may Allah give us tawfiq to understand this blessing. May Allah give us tawfiq to understand the value of us breathing this kalima and being the ummah of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Which one of us asked Allah to have this kalima, breathe this kalima? This kalima that can be a means of our salvation on the day of judgment, or it will be, inshallah, a means of our salvation. And one benefit of this surah that we can implement into our life is, once Rasulullah sallallahu came, and another narration where he said, anyone who recites Surah Ikhlāṣ and Mu'awwidhatayn is Surah the last two surahs, Surah Falaq and Surah Nas. Tomorrow, inshallah, the tafsir will take place by Maulana Kamil. Join us for that, inshallah, also. So, what does Nabi Kareem sallallahu say? What's the benefit? Whoever recites the last three surahs of the Quran, morning and evening, they shall also be sufficient for him. And another narration mentions that they will suffice him against every affliction. That whoever recites these last three surahs brings this habit into their life, that these three surahs will help and protect him from any calamity, any affliction. And you have the narration of Uqba bin Amir, right? Uqba bin Amir, where Rasulullah said that these the last three surahs were also revealed in the Torah, in the Injil, and the Quran, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran. And Rasulullah said, you shall not sleep until you recite these last three surahs. And Uqba bin Amir narrates that he never fell asleep until he recited these last three surahs. And it is a means of us being protected from any calamity, any affliction. So have this habit of bringing this surah into our life, and have this raja, this hope that inshallah, when we recite the surah, number one is we are free from any shirk. We are establishing the tawheed of Allah, the oneness of Allah. Number two, we are getting the reward equivalent to 1/3 of the Quran, subhanAllah. We are getting the reward equal to reciting 1/3 of the Quran. And number three, that these last three surahs, if we recite them morning and evening, then we are free from any calamity, any affliction. So may Allah give us tawfiq to act upon what has been said. May Allah give us tawfiq to implement and understand these chapters of the Quran and bring them into our life. خيركم من تعلم القرآن وعلمه. Right? Nabi Kareem sallallahu was a walking Quran. So it's not necessarily about learning, rather it's also about implementing it into your life. And may Allah give us tawfiq to spend the last remaining nights of Ramadan worshipping Allah Azza wa Jal. Tonight is the 27th night. Tonight is the 27th night. So read some Quran. Read Surah Ikhlāṣ with the intention of 1/3 of the Quran. And maximize these last remaining nights. There's still the opportunity of Laylatul Qadr. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.